Whispers in the Nursery. The Black Nanny and the CEO's hidden past, Amara. Johnson stepped from the rain-slicked driveway into the cavernous marble foyer of Ashford Manor, her worn leather satchel heavy at her side, and her senses instantly ensnared by the hush that clung to the gilded halls like lingering perfume. The grand chandelier overhead cast fractured patterns of light across her path, each glint dancing like a cautious heartbeat as she tightened her grip on her satchel strap and allowed her eyes to take in the subtle signs of opulence around her. The delicate sheen of polished mahogany banisters, the intricate stitching of Persian rugs that swallowed the sound of her footsteps, and the faint trace of lavender oil emanating from gleaming brass diffusers. Behind the double doors at the end of the corridor lay her new charge, 12-week-old Clara Ashford, whose tiny cries had first drawn Amara here, summoned by a polite but distant letter from Mr. Cole Ashford himself, whose name had tickled the edge of her professional curiosity for weeks. Stepping forward, Amara felt the ancient weight of the house press upon her, as though every portrait-lined wall were silently observing her arrival, measuring her worth against the legacy of the family that had built its fortune, and perhaps its secrets. Right here, she paused at the threshold of the nursery door, smoothing her dark curls into a tight bun, and exhaled as though shedding an unseen mantle of trepidation. This was more than just another position as a nanny. This was the center of a mystery she could almost taste in the cool, fragrant air. When the door swung open at her knock, she beheld the child, small and fragile in her ivory bassinet, limbs curled like petals in bloom, and sensed before she even met his gaze that Mr. Ashford was watching her from the doorway. A tall figure, cut in sharp silhouette, backlit by the muted glow of an adjacent hallway. He stepped forward, and the hush fractured with the soft echo of his polished shoes against the floor, announcing the arrival of a man whose reputation for relentless efficiency and steely command was whispered about in boardrooms nationwide. Amara summoned her warmest smile and offered her hand. Cole Ashford, the 30-year-old CEO whose arresting blue eyes had become the subject of countless magazine spreads, took it with a measured nod, his touch light yet somehow electrifying, as if he weighed her worth in a single heartbeat. His gaze flicked from her hand up to her face, appraising and inscrutable, then to the child whose chest rose and fell in gentle staccato beneath a sea of pale blankets. The silence swelled, pregnant with unspoken questions. What had brought this man of control and power to entrust his most precious treasure to a stranger? What sorrow had carved such distance in the curve of his jaw and shadowed the brilliance of those ocean blue eyes? Accepting her satchel, he offered only, "She'll be in good hands," and turned, footsteps fading, leaving Amara alone with Clara's soft coos and the lingering echo of his departure. Heart pounding, Amara bent to cradle the child, feeling tiny fingers flutter against her palm and catching a glimpse of a delicate gold locket that rested against the baby's throat. A memento, perhaps, of a mother lost too soon. With practiced calm, she lifted the infant, humming a gentle lullaby under her breath, all the while attuned to the slight draught that whispered through a cracked window pane high above, carrying with it the distant rumble of thunder and the promise of secrets bursting free. As she settled Clara into her arms, Amara's mind raced with the possibilities hidden behind every locked door in the house. The locked drawer she had glimpsed in the study, the hushed conversations that halted when she neared the staff pantry, the half-erased scorch mark on a velvet-lined chest. She tucked a loose curl behind her ear, smoothing the baby's blanket with one hand and scanning the nursery's pastel walls lined with storybook illustrations of brave heroines and protective guardians. In that moment, beneath the gentle halo of the nightlight, Amara resolved not only to nurture the child entrusted to her care, but to unravel the hushed whispers swirling through Ashford Manor, that behind every polished surface lay a tale of love, loss, and perhaps betrayal. And that in doing so, she might discover whether the man with the striking blue eyes could learn to trust again. Outside the nursery window, moonlight pooled like silver oil across the polished floorboards, as though the house itself conspired to conceal its secrets in shadow. As hush draped the hallway, Amara's breath hitched, every footstep she took reverberating faintly against the marble walls. The air felt charged, alive with unspoken history, as she pressed her palm to the cool banister, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. A soft creak echoed from the corner, where an antique rocking chair swayed imperceptibly, though no hand had touched it in her sight. Amara steadied herself, reminding her heart that this was only a house, however ancient its burdens. Yet even as she reminded herself, a tendril of unease curled around her, stirring memories of the letter she'd found days before. Elene, scrawled in delicate script beneath a date she recognized as the night Lila died. She paused at the nursery door, sensing Clara's light cooing like a beacon, guiding her into deeper mysteries. With a deep, steadying breath, Amara pushed it open. The nursery was bathed in muted lamplight, the gentle glow illuminating pastel walls lined with storybook illustrations of brave heroines and protective guardians, art that seemed to watch her as closely as she watched them. Clara lay asleep in her bassinet, the curve of her tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm with Amara's own pulse. Leaning closer, Amara smoothed a tendril of hair from the infant's forehead, her mind drifting to the half-burned photograph she'd glimpsed in the study. Lila's face, regal even in ruin, her eyes locked on something unseen. Outside, the wind whispered through the cracked window pane, carrying a faint rustle as though someone, or something, had just passed. Amara's gaze flicked upward to the latch. It was latched shut. Yet the whisper persisted, soft and mournful, threading through Clara's breath, as though the baby itself carried an echo of Lila's voice. Amara swallowed hard, her resolve hardening. She set Clara gently on the changing table, the baby stirring and blinking up at her with wide, trusting eyes. "Shh," Amara murmured, brushing the infant's downy cheek. In that moment, the nursery door clicked softly, and Amara whirled, half expecting Cole to enter, but finding instead only the heavy drapes shifting in the breeze. Her heart thundered as she crossed to the window, fingertips brushing the cold glass, and for a fleeting second she could swear she saw a face pressed against the other side. Pale, sorrowful, vanishing when she blinked. A gasp escaped her lips, but Clara only looked on with that uncanny calm, as if newborn instinct allowed the child to see beyond the veil. Amara stepped back, her senses ablaze. Every portrait she had passed in the hall now seemed to hold its breath. She glanced down at the baby's locket, a delicate circle of gold resting on soft flesh, and felt the weight of its silence. Pressed between them, it seemed a symbol of promises left unspoken, of truths buried just beneath the surface. Drawing herself up, Amara tucked Clara into her arms and paced, softly humming the lullaby Cole's wife might have sung. As she did, the lullaby faltered into a whisper, barely audible. "Don't cry, like your mother did." Amara froze, the words sinking into her like ice. Her pulse hammered as she scanned the empty room. No wind, no drafts. Only the low, insistent murmur that beckoned her closer to the heart of the manor's mystery. Setting Clara gently back into the bassinet, Amara met the baby's gaze, steeling herself for what came next. The unraveling of a past that refused to stay buried, the quiet conspirator of every breath in Ashford Manor, and the promise that tomorrow's dawn would bring more than light. It would bring revelations. Outside the locked door, the corridor lay silent and expectant. Each footstep Amara took, echoing like a question unanswered. As the musty lock shimmered in the dim lamplight, Amara paused, sensing every breath she took. As the dimly lit corridor quivered, Amara's pulse quickened with each step. As the gilded whisper drifted, Amara swallowed hard, steadying her resolve. As the ancient echo rustled, Amara's reflection flickered in a nearby brass plaque. As the silent dust pulsed, Amara traced a finger along the ancient woodwork. As the dust-laden breath hovered, Amara's senses sharpened to every creak. As the ornate heartbeat danced, Amara leaned closer, heart pounding. As the tense moment wavered, Amara's nerves hummed with anticipation. As the echoing canvas etched itself, Amara held her breath, listening. As the shadowed gaze drifted, Amara felt a shiver crawl up her spine. As the haunting memory glinted, Amara's thoughts raced with possibilities. As the restless canvas drifted, Amara steadied herself against the cold wall. At line 50, she discovered the heavy door, once hidden behind velvet drapes, was locked with a small brass keyhole. As the ornate whisper shimmered, Amara paused, sensing every breath she took. As the ancient portrait quivered, Amara's pulse quickened with each step. As the dimly lit echo drifted, Amara swallowed hard, steadying her resolve. As the dust-laden moment rustled, Amara's reflection flickered in a nearby brass plaque. As the silent heartbeat pulsed, Amara traced a finger along the ancient woodwork. As the gilded breath hovered, Amara's senses sharpened to every creak. As the shadowed dust danced, Amara leaned closer, heart pounding. As the ornate whisper wavered, Amara's nerves hummed with anticipation. As the echoing memory etched itself, Amara held her breath, listening. As the restless canvas drifted, Amara felt a shiver crawl up her spine. As the haunting echo glinted, Amara's thoughts raced with possibilities. As the musty moment drifted, Amara steadied herself against the cold wall. At line 100, Amara produced the ornate key she had found in the study and inserted it with trembling hands. As the aged lock shimmered, Amara paused, sensing every breath she took. As the ancient whisper quivered, Amara's pulse quickened with each step. As the shadowed echo drifted, Amara swallowed hard, steadying her resolve. As the dust-laden moment rustled, Amara's reflection flickered in a nearby brass plaque. As the silent heartbeat pulsed, Amara traced a finger along the ancient woodwork. As the gilded breath hovered, Amara's senses sharpened to every creak. As the ornate portrait danced, Amara leaned closer, heart pounding. As the tense memory wavered, Amara's nerves hummed with anticipation. As the echoing canvas etched itself, Amara held her breath, listening. As the restless echo drifted, Amara felt a shiver crawl up her spine. As the haunting moment glinted, Amara's thoughts raced with possibilities. As the dimly lit dust drifted, Amara steadied herself against the cold wall. At line 150, the door swung open to reveal a room frozen in time, shelves lined with mementos covered in dust. At line 150, the door swung open to reveal a room frozen in time, shelves lined with mementos covered in dust. As the silent air met her skin, Amara stepped inside, the floorboards groaning faintly beneath her feet, like a voice trying to speak after years of silence. As the dust-laden scent thickened, her eyes scanned the gloom until the golden frame caught the lamplight. A portrait resting at an angle on a marble pedestal near the fireplace. The edges were charred, warped by flame, yet the remnants of a woman's face peeked through the blackened veil. Amara took another step, breath held hostage by awe and unease. Her fingertips, tentative but compelled, reached toward the canvas. The closer she drew, the more impossible it became to deny what her eyes saw. Cheekbones, brows, and lips shaped exactly like hers. At line 200, her eyes fell upon a half-burned portrait propped against the far wall, its edges charred and face obscured. The resemblance stabbed through her chest like memory of a life she'd never lived. The room's temperature seemed to drop, or perhaps it was her blood running cold, as realization formed a weight in her gut. A name whispered through her mind, Lila. As if summoned by thought, a gust stirred the ashes in the grate, and in the dance of soot she imagined fragments of laughter and sorrow echoing. Amara crouched, brushing soot from the edges with careful reverence. At line 250, she recognized the features in the painting. Lila Ashford's face, shockingly like her own. The portrait wasn't just a likeness, it was a mirror through fire and time. Her heart beat faster, then faster still as her mind chased dangerous thoughts. Why would the late Mrs. Ashford look so much like her? Could this be coincidence, or was it something far more entangled? She stood, vision wavering slightly, when she noticed more beneath the portrait. A scorched paper label bearing the words, "For Cole." Forgive me. At line 300, Amara reached out, brushing soot from the canvas to expose Lila's serene, regal gaze. The eyes in the painting seemed to plead for something. Recognition, justice, memory. Before she could make sense of it, a sound fractured the silence. A footstep behind her, heavy and sure. At line 350, the hearth beside the portrait bore scorch marks matching those on the portrait's frame. She straightened slowly, heartbeat hammering now with fear rather than wonder. The door creaked again behind her. At line 400, Amara heard footsteps behind her and spun to find Cole in the doorway, his expression dark. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice low but razor-edged. His blue eyes flicked from Amara to the painting, and then back again, narrowing as if fighting the memory of something he couldn't face. Amara's mouth parted, but the words tangled in her throat. "You knew," she said finally, hoarsely, not sure whether it was a question or accusation. At line 450, Cole's voice cut through the silence. "This room is off limits. You must leave now." But Amara didn't move. The energy between them surged, years of lies swelling in the thick air. "Why does she look like me?" Amara asked. Cole turned his gaze from her to the fire, jaw tight. "Because she was your aunt," he said finally, his voice weighted by grief and something darker. At line 500, Amara stood her ground, feeling the truth pulse between them and understanding the depths of his secrets. The silence that followed his confession was like a scream pressed between walls. Amara took a step forward, fury and sadness blooming in tandem. "You let me work here, without telling me?" she said. I didn't know until I saw you, Cole said. Not for sure. Lila never told anyone. But that portrait, that resemblance, it confirmed what I feared. At line 550, Cole's jaw tightened as he stepped forward, hand reaching for the painting, but Amara clasped his wrist. Their eyes locked. Why was the portrait burned? She demanded. Cole hesitated. Because someone tried to erase her, and everything she knew. The weight of Cole's words still lingered, like smoke clinging to Amara's clothes as she slipped from the forbidden room, the vision of the scorched portrait haunting the back of her mind with every step. She wandered the hallways of the mansion like a ghost herself, silent and aimless, until a sudden voice startled her. Mrs. Elspeth, the head housekeeper, standing near the staircase, with folded arms and a gaze that had seen too much. You saw it, didn't you? Elspeth said, not unkindly, but with something unreadable in her tone. Amara froze. The painting, she replied slowly, and the older woman gave a solemn nod. They stood in quiet tension, years humming between them. She died in that fire, Elspeth murmured, casting a glance down the hall, as if expecting shadows to eavesdrop. They said it was an accident, but this house, it knows when lies have been told. Her voice lowered to a whisper. Lila wasn't just the lady of the house. She had fire in her. Love, yes, but secrets too. Amara leaned in, her heart pounding with curiosity. What kind of secrets? Elspeth hesitated, as if unlocking an old gate in her soul. She loved someone, maybe more than one. Some say it wasn't just Cole. Some say Cole found out. The words wrapped around Amara's mind like vines, tight and urgent. Was there an affair? Elspeth's eyes flickered. Rumors, she said, but enough to stoke flames, if you believe in the power of jealous hearts. Amara felt the chill in the air, despite the warm morning sun filtering through stained glass. She had sensed something about Cole, something tender and angry both. She thanked Elspeth and turned toward the old library, drawn by instinct and fear that the truth had been buried beneath soot and silence. In the dusty corner of the room, she found the mansion's archival chest, bound in leather and brass, long untouched. She pried it open, dust pluming like breath from the past. Clippings, letters, and half-burned notes spilled out like ghosts. One yellowed article caught her eye, heiress Lila Ashford, dead in mysterious fire. No cause officially determined. No signs of forced entry. Rumors of volatile arguments in the weeks before. At line 50, Amara discovered a witness statement, scribbled hastily in a corner. Screams came from the east wing, not the bedroom. Her brow furrowed. The east wing housed the gallery, not the master suite. Why had Lila been there? Another slip of parchment, creased and faded, bore a charcoal sketch of the nursery, half finished. On the back, the initials J.W. and a note. She said she couldn't take it anymore. Amara's pulse surged. Who was J.W.? A lover? A confidant? A threat? Her hands trembled as she placed it gently back. Then came the letters, folded in expensive stationery, words etched in hurried ink. He's changed. He watches me. I can't breathe in this house anymore. The signature was simply L. Amara's breath caught as she imagined Lila trapped in golden cages, beauty masking danger. She couldn't shake the image of Cole's clenched jaw in that locked room, or the way he'd refused to look at the portrait too long. Did guilt live in those blue eyes? Or grief? She didn't know yet. But she would find out. She didn't know yet. But she would find out. That determination simmered beneath her skin as Amara descended the stairs and returned to the servants' quarters, her mind churning like the ocean under moonlight. Every face she passed seemed to shift when her eyes met theirs. Maids averted their gaze, gardeners fell quiet mid-sentence, and one footman actually dropped a tray when she neared. Something about her presence, her questions, was setting the mansion's heartbeat out of rhythm. That night, when the house settled into its midnight hush, Amara tiptoed barefoot across the marble floor and made her way to the east wing. The gallery doors groaned as she opened them, and moonlight stretched in ribbons across the floor, catching on shattered glass and the long-abandoned easel covered in a painter's tarp. She stepped forward and pulled the cloth away, revealing a half-finished portrait of a child, a baby, swaddled in lace, eyes startlingly blue. Her fingers brushed the dry, cracking paint. On the lower corner, smeared as if in a rush, were two initials again, J.W. Her breath caught. She was sure now it was someone important to Lila, someone who perhaps had painted her, loved her, warned her. A whisper behind her startled her. She turned swiftly, only to find the housekeeper again, standing in the gallery's shadow, like an echo. "You shouldn't be in here," Elspeth said, but her voice held no reprimand, only fear. "This room. This is where the fire started. It didn't begin in the bedroom, like the papers said. The flames came from here first, leapt through the vents, crawled across ceilings." Amara's eyes widened. Why lie? Elspeth stepped closer. Because lies protect names, names with power. This wasn't just a fire. This was erasure. Amara's voice trembled. "Who was J.W.? The housekeeper hesitated, then exhaled like surrender. "Jacob Weller, the artist. He painted all of Lila's private portraits, and he was more than her painter. Cole never admitted it, but everyone knew." The silence stretched, thick with dangerous memory. Amara looked again at the child's portrait. "Was he the father?" she whispered. Elspeth closed her eyes. That's the question that started the fire. At line 300, Amara felt her knees weaken. Could the baby, could the child, be someone else's? And yet she saw Cole with the infant every morning, eyes warm, love undeniable. She thought back to the sorrow in his voice, the weariness he wore like a cloak. The truth couldn't be that simple. And then Elspeth, reluctant but firm, added one more sentence that froze Amara's spine. Jacob disappeared the night Lila died. Vanished. No body. No farewell. Nothing. Amara swallowed hard. Her thoughts were unraveling in every direction. Back in her room, she unfolded the letter again, rereading Lila's words. "I can't breathe in this house anymore." They weren't just the words of a woman afraid. They were words of someone hunted, cornered, perhaps betrayed. She barely slept that night, and when dawn crept in with grey fingers, she found herself standing before Cole again, this time in the courtyard, baby in arms, his eyes shadowed, but still that same disarming blue. "She didn't die in the bedroom," Amara said quietly. His body stiffened. "I know." The admission was soft, almost inaudible. "You lied." "I protected her," he said. "From what?" she asked, heart thundering. From how they would twist her memory. Silence thickened. Then he said, "She wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But I didn't kill her, Amara." She believed him, and yet doubt tugged at her ankles like undertow. "Then who did?" she asked. He looked down at the baby and whispered, "I think we're about to find out." At line 450, Amara realized the danger wasn't in what had happened, but in what still lingered. Lila's death hadn't been the end of something. It had been the spark. Someone else in the mansion knew more. Someone who had burned a woman from the story, but left behind her child, her lover's brushstrokes, and a locked door that only cried at night. At line 500, Amara turned back to the gallery once more, this time knowing exactly what she was searching for. She pried open the baseboards, following the hollow sound until her fingers found a small metal box wedged between the floorboards. Inside were more letters, this time not from Lila, but to her, from Jacob. "Run away with me," one read. "He suspects. We have to go now." And another, "I won't let him take her from us." Amara gasped. Her, not just Lila. He meant the baby. Her stomach turned. The baby wasn't Cole's, or at least not Jacob's either. Or maybe neither knew. The truth was lost in ash. At line 550, the final letter was blood-stained at the corner and torn. "They know," it read, "and they're coming tonight." The date on it was the day before Lila died. Amara's eyes burned. She knew now. Lila hadn't just died. She had been silenced. And somewhere in the house, someone still held the matchbook. She turned towards the baby's room, where faint humming drifted from the hallway. When she looked inside, Cole was rocking the child gently, tears silently marking his cheek. Their eyes met, and for once he didn't hide. At line 600, as Amara stepped into the nursery, both of them surrounded by firelight, not from destruction, but from morning sun. A quiet understanding passed between them. The ashes still whispered, and they would listen. Together. The morning unfolded with a rare quiet, the kind that blankets old houses after truths have been exhumed, when even the floorboards seem to tread lightly in respect. Amara spent the early hours in the nursery, sunlight spilling over her lap as the baby cooed in her arms, tiny fingers wrapping around one of hers with innocent claim. The warmth of that moment surprised her, unexpected, unguarded. This child, born of secrets and fire, had somehow become her anchor in the storm. She found herself humming lullabies she didn't remember learning, letting the baby's gentle weight melt the hardened edges she'd carried since arriving. As the hours passed, her connection to the child grew deeper. Not just duty, not even maternal instinct, but something spiritual, as if she were meant to find her way here. To this baby, to this broken house full of echoes. But the more tender her bond grew, the more complicated things became, between her and Cole. Their glances now carried too much: guilt, confusion, protectiveness. When he entered the nursery that afternoon, she felt his presence before he spoke, like a thundercloud just out of reach. "You've been with her all day," he said, voice low, but laced with something sharp. Amara looked up from the floor, where she was stacking wooden blocks with the baby. "Yes," she replied calmly. She needed comfort. "And I didn't?" he asked suddenly, surprising even himself. She blinked. "You want comfort from me?" He exhaled roughly and paced to the window, his back a silhouette against pale gold light. "I don't know what I want," he admitted, "but I know you've become part of this, of her world, and mine." The room grew thick with unsaid things. Amara stood slowly, setting the child gently in the crib. "You're angry," she said. "But not at me. Not really." He turned then, eyes flaring. "Aren't I?" "No," she said. "You're angry because you're scared. Scared you don't know how to protect her. Scared you'll fail her like—" "Don't," he snapped, voice breaking. "Don't say his name." Amara stepped closer, undeterred. Like your father. The silence that followed cracked something invisible between them. Cole's fists clenched at his sides. You don't know what he was, he muttered. What he did to my mother. What he did to me. Then tell me, she whispered. Don't carry it alone. He stared at her, blue eyes raw and brimming, until suddenly the dam burst. He sat down hard on the edge of the crib and put his face in his hands. He used to say people like you weren't worth the dirt on his boots, he said, his voice hoarse with rage and shame. He beat her, my mother, for marrying someone who wasn't pure. He beat me when I cried, told me love was weakness, that emotions were poison. I grew up in fear, Amara. In shadows, her throat tightened. She knelt beside him, gently placing a hand on his knee. And now you're afraid that's in you too. He looked at her, the torment in his gaze unbearable. Every time I lose my temper, I hear his voice. Every time I look at my daughter, I wonder if I'm enough, if I'll protect her, or become him. Amara's heart ached in the quiet. But you're not him, Cole. You stayed. You're raising her with gentleness. You cry when you think no one sees. That's not weakness. That's love. He reached up then, brushing a tear from her cheek that she hadn't realized had fallen. Their faces were too close, their pain too raw. The air between them sparked with emotion neither dared name. He whispered, I'm sorry. For yelling. For everything. She nodded, and for a moment, time folded around them. Just two broken souls stitched together by grief, fire, and the steady beat of a child's breath. Then the baby stirred and whimpered in her crib, snapping the moment like a branch underfoot. Amara rose and tended to her, her fingers soft and sure. Cole watched from behind, the weight on his shoulders shifting, but not gone. My father, he said again, quietly. He used to lock me in the cellar when I disobeyed. One time I stayed there for 2 days. I swore I'd never be like him. But sometimes I feel the rage in me, the same blood, and I hate it. Amara turned, holding the baby now, her voice steady. Rage doesn't make you him. It's what you do with it that matters. He nodded slowly, taking in her words like medicine. I see you with her, he added. The way she looks at you. You've given her something I can't. Amara stepped closer. Love isn't a competition, Cole. It's a lifeline. And this baby needs both of us, truthfully. He swallowed hard. I want to trust you. I want to tell you everything. She gave a small smile. Then start by trusting yourself. At line 300, they stood in stillness, the air filled not with passion, but with deep connection. Unspoken bonds forming from pain, stitching over the burns of their pasts. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Amara found herself outside the manor, staring up at the roofline, where smoke once rose years ago. She could feel the house watching, waiting. Cole joined her without a word, standing beside her in shared silence. Did you ever love her? She asked. Lila? He nodded once. I did. But love isn't always enough when truth is missing. Did she love you back? Amara asked. His jaw twitched. Some days, yes. Others, I think she was just surviving. Amara understood that kind of love, the kind done out of desperation, fear, not freedom. And now, she asked, what do you feel now? Cole turned to her, searching her face as though she held answers he couldn't reach alone. Hope, he whispered. And guilt. And something I don't have words for when I look at you. Amara held his gaze. Start with hope, she said. Let that be the first thing you pass down to your daughter." The baby cried again, and Cole moved instantly, drawn by instinct. She watched him cradle the child gently, whispering soft words. He looked up, and in his eyes Amara saw not the boy who had been broken, but the man trying to build something beautiful from ash. The bond between them all was forming quietly, Amara, the child, and Cole, woven not through blood, but through fire, and the will to rise from it. At line 450, Cole sat beside her on the nursery floor that night, baby asleep in a nest of blankets between them. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence carried their truths, held like glass in careful hands. At line 500, Cole's voice broke the stillness. "I want to believe I can be good," he said. "Not just for her, but for you too." Amara looked at him, something warm blooming in her chest. "Then show me," she said. "Every day." He nodded, tears shining in his lashes, and she took his hand. Not in romance, not yet, but in trust. That night she lay in her room, staring at the ceiling, the baby's soft breaths in the next room, and Cole's pain echoing quietly in hers. The house creaked like it was listening, and perhaps, finally, it approved. At line 550, the fire of the past began to cool just enough to let something new take root. Not perfect, not simple, but real. And as the dawn approached, painting the world in soft rose, Amara knew this was only the beginning of what lay between them. A bond, unspoken but unbreakable, was already forming beneath the surface. And it was growing stronger with every heartbeat shared in silence. The storm arrived like a warning, wind howling across the hills and battering the windows of the old manor, as if the house itself were being reprimanded by the sky. Rain fell in sheets, turning the garden paths to rivers and the night into a symphony of thunder and lightning. Inside, the warmth of firelight did little to ease the unease crawling beneath Amara's skin as she paced the length of the upstairs hall, heart pounding, breath tight, questions pressing against the roof of her mouth like an itch that refused to be silenced. She had tried to wait, to be patient, to let trust bloom on its own. But too many whispers, too many ghosts still lingered, and Cole's silence had grown into a wall too thick to ignore. When she found him alone in the study, seated in a high-backed chair by the fire, nursing a drink and staring into the flames like they might answer him, she didn't hesitate. "We need to talk," she said, voice steady despite the storm echoing through her bones. He glanced at her, surprised, guarded. "Now?" "Yes, now," she replied, stepping in and shutting the door behind her with a click that seemed to seal them into something inescapable. He straightened but didn't rise, the glass resting against his thigh like a defense. "What about?" "Lila," Amara said, crossing her arms, her heart rattling against her ribs. "And that night, the fire, the truth." His eyes narrowed, flickering with something dark. "We've talked about this." "No," she said sharply, stepping closer. "You've dodged. You've whispered fragments. But you've never told me what really happened. And I deserve to know. Because I'm here. Because I care. And because your daughter deserves more than shadows." His jaw flexed, muscles taut, breath flaring. "You care," he repeated, almost bitterly. "Do you? Or are you just another person waiting for me to slip?" Her eyes burned. "Don't twist this into an attack. I'm not your father. And I'm not Lila." "No," he snapped, rising suddenly, glass thunking onto the table as he towered over her, rain streaking the windows behind him. "You're not. You're worse. Because you make me feel things I've spent years locking away. The words sliced the air. Amara's breath hitched, but she didn't flinch. Maybe that's not a bad thing. It is, he growled, because when I feel, I lose control. And when I lose control, people get hurt. Lila, she demanded, voice low and dangerous. Is that what happened? You lost control. His eyes flashed with pain, and something else, guilt. I never laid a hand on her, he said, voice cracking. But I hated her, toward the end. I hated what we became, the silence, the lies, the way she looked at me like I was the villain in her story. Amara's voice softened. Were you? The question hovered like smoke. He looked away. I don't know, he whispered. Maybe. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the room in brief silver. Amara stepped closer. Why did you stay with her? His voice was barely audible. Because of the baby. Because I thought I could fix it. Because I was afraid of being alone. The vulnerability in his voice pierced through her anger, softening her edges. You're not alone anymore, she said quietly. He turned back to her, eyes blazing, and something broke, shattered between them. Without warning, he crossed the distance, hands tangling in her hair, lips crashing onto hers with a desperation that wasn't gentle, wasn't clean. It was messy, bruising, terrifying, and real. She gasped into the kiss, but didn't pull away. Her arms looped around his neck, pulling him closer, matching his fire with her own. They kissed like people drowning, like survivors of the same wreck, like truth had finally found its voice through skin. It wasn't romantic, it was raw. And when they broke apart, breathless, thunder rolling above them like applause from the heavens, the silence that followed was too loud. He stepped back first. She saw it, the wall rebuilding in his eyes, brick by brick. Cole, she began, but he shook his head, already closing off, already retreating. That shouldn't have happened, he said flatly, turning away. Why not? She asked, voice trembling. Because I can't give you what you want, he replied. Because this is complicated enough. That's not a reason, she snapped. That's fear. It's survival, he retorted. Don't you get it? Everyone I care about ends up ruined. I'm not fragile, she said fiercely. Then why do I want to protect you? He shot back, running a hand through his hair, pacing like a man on the verge of breaking. Why do I feel like losing you would hurt more than anything I've already survived? She stepped forward, reaching for him. Then don't push me away. But he pulled back, just out of reach. It's safer this way. She didn't respond. The silence between them stretched until the clock on the mantel ticked louder than the storm. Then she turned, walked to the door, and left without another word. The next morning, the sun rose without apology, casting golden light over the mansion's wet stone walls and shining through windows still trembling from the night before. Amara awoke feeling bruised, but not from sleep. She dressed slowly, wondering if it had all been a dream, if the kiss had happened only in her mind. But when she walked into the dining room and saw Cole already seated at the table, newspaper in hand, posture stiff, eyes cool, she knew. He didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't even nod in acknowledgement. Good morning, she said carefully. Morning, he replied, flipping a page without meeting her gaze. Her stomach sank. She sat across from him, heart twisting. The baby gurgled in her high chair between them, unaware of the ice forming across the table. She slept well, Amara offered. Good, he said shortly. Silence again. The eggs grew cold, The coffee tasted like ash. Finally, Amara couldn't bear it. "Are we going to talk about it?" she asked. He looked up briefly, eyes unreadable. "About what?" The words hit like a slap. "About last night," she said, sharper now. "The argument, the kiss." He folded the paper. "Nothing happened." Her chest tightened. "Nothing? That's how you're playing this." "It was a mistake," he said, standing. "We were both emotional." "Don't reduce it," she snapped. "Don't you dare pretend it meant nothing." "It can't mean something," he said firmly. "Not now." She stood too, heart pounding. "You kissed me, Cole. You opened up. You let me in." "And I regret it," he replied coldly. That silenced her. He walked out without another word, leaving the room colder than the storm had ever been. At line 500, Amara remained frozen, the baby's babble the only sound, as her heart cracked in quiet defiance. Later that day, she avoided him. She stayed in the nursery, in the library, in the corners of the house where his shadow wouldn't reach. And he let her. That night, when she passed him in the hall, their eyes met for a heartbeat. She saw everything in his: conflict, longing, fear. But he said nothing. Neither did she. At line 550, the house once again returned to stillness. But now it was a stillness built from tension, not comfort. A storm had passed, yes, but another was waiting. Amara stared at the moon that night and whispered to herself, "You can lie to me, Cole, but you can't lie to yourself forever." Somewhere in the dark, she swore, the wind carried a sigh. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't only hers. The rain had dried, but the air in the mansion still held a heaviness that refused to lift, a damp sort of silence that lingered in corners like secrets too tired to hide anymore. Amara, ever restless now, wandered the halls that morning with her fingers trailing the wood-panelled walls, not in search of Cole, but in search of clarity, something to ground her after the wreckage of the previous night, after his kiss and colder dismissal. Her mind refused to settle, torn between heartbreak and an undeniable pull toward something more, or something unfinished. It was in the West Wing, the part of the house she rarely entered, that she paused near an old linen closet. The latch had always been rusted shut, yet today it clicked open with surprising ease, revealing not just moth-eaten towels, but a small wooden box buried beneath a pile of faded tablecloths. Dust clung to its hinges, and her fingers trembled as she pried it open. Inside, tucked beneath a dried rose and an old ribbon, lay a cream-colored envelope, its edges worn, its ink faded but legible. Her heart stilled as she read the name scrawled across it. "To my darling daughter, if she ever wonders." The signature chilled her to the core. Lila Monroe? Her breath caught as she pulled it out, the weight of the paper oddly heavy for something so fragile. Alone in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. The handwriting was elegant, but uneven, as if written in haste, in fear. "My sweet girl," it began, "if you are reading this, I pray the world has been kind to you. I pray you have your father's eyes and not his shadows, and that someone brave was there to raise you if I could not. But there are things you must know, things I couldn't say aloud because I was being watched, not by your father, though we had our battles, but by someone else. Someone from your father's past. Someone who hated him deeply. I tried to warn him, but he wouldn't listen. He thought I was imagining things, but I wasn't. I found things, letters, threats. I felt eyes on me, even in this house. Especially in this house. And now I fear I fear I won't make it to see you grow. If I die, it won't be an accident. But it won't be because of your father either. Please, trust him. Even when it's hard, he loves you in his own way. But don't trust the walls around you. Not all ghosts are dead. And not all enemies wear masks. The letter ended there. No date, no location, just that final eerie warning. Amara stared at the page, her mind reeling, her stomach coiling with unease. It shifted everything. Lila hadn't feared Cole. She had feared someone else. And not someone outside, someone inside. She folded the letter carefully and slid it back into its envelope, her hands trembling. Her first instinct was to find Cole, to confront him, but something stopped her. Would he believe her? Or would he think she was manipulating him? Worse, what if he knew more than he let on, and had simply buried it like the rest of his grief? No, she needed proof. She needed to know who Lila had feared. And that meant asking questions and watching, starting with the staff. The housekeeper, Meredith, had worked in the mansion for years, long before Amara's arrival. She was discreet, kind, but also protective in a way that sometimes felt too invested. Amara found her in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew, humming softly. "Meredith," she began, forcing calm into her voice. "Did Lila ever seem afraid?" Meredith didn't look up right away. "All women in love are afraid of something, dear." "I mean real fear," Amara pressed. "Did she ever talk about someone following her?" The spoon paused mid-stir. "Why are you asking?" Amara stepped closer. "I found something. A letter she wrote. She said she was being watched. That if she died, it wouldn't be an accident." Meredith's knuckles whitened around the spoon. "She was always dramatic," she said softly. Too softly. She had a way of seeing monsters in every mirror. "But were they real?" Amara whispered. Meredith finally turned to her, eyes shadowed. "You're playing a dangerous game, girl. Sometimes the past should stay buried." Amara held her gaze. Not when a child's future is at stake. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered the halls again, clutching the letter as if it could answer questions it had only deepened. She paused outside Cole's office. The light was on. She almost knocked, almost told him everything. But instead, she stood there, listening, watching the man she couldn't quite hate, even when he tried to push her away. Inside, he looked lost, staring at the fire again, drink untouched. A man haunted not by guilt, but by grief and confusion. She left without speaking. The next morning, the air had shifted. The baby was restless, clinging to Amara more than usual. Her cries pierced the quiet, and Amara's nerves frayed under the pressure. But the child's tiny hand, reaching for her cheek, grounded her. "I'll find the truth," Amara whispered. "For you. For her." As she explored the library later that day, she noticed a gap in the lower bookshelf behind a curtain, a false panel, loose at the edge. Her fingers worked the crack open until the panel slid aside, revealing a narrow compartment with several yellowing envelopes tied together with twine. Inside were letters, angry, bitter letters written in jagged script, threats, not to Lila, but to Cole. "You stole everything from me. One day, I'll take it back. Your wife, your name, your peace, no signature." But each letter hinted at an old betrayal, something business-related, personal, violent. Names were scratched out, except one. Jameson. The name meant nothing to her. Not yet. But it would. She photocopied the letters and replaced them, heart pounding. Outside the window, storm clouds gathered again. She didn't know who Jameson was, but Lila had feared him. Maybe he was the ghost. Maybe he was still watching. At line 500, Amara stood in the hall, holding both letters, one from a woman who died trying to protect her daughter, the other from a man who might have killed to avenge something no one remembered. As the thunder rumbled in the distance, she realized one thing. She could no longer trust anyone in that house blindly. Not even herself. At line 550, she slipped into the nursery, where the baby reached for her and laughed, innocent, unaware. Amara kissed her forehead and held her close. "You deserve to know the truth," she whispered, "and I'll find it, no matter what it costs me." She had come as a nanny. Now she was something else entirely, a detective of love, loss, and legacy, caught in a web far older and darker than she ever imagined. It happened on a Thursday, just as the sun broke through the clouds and the baby finally giggled again, when the front gates of Ashford Manor creaked open for someone the house hadn't seen in years. The car was sleek, black, expensive, in the kind of quiet way that meant money and danger, and when it stopped in the circular driveway, the air itself seemed to hush. Amara watched from the nursery window, a shiver running down her spine, before she even saw him step out, before his polished shoes hit the stone path and his long shadow stretched across the entrance like a crack forming in the earth. The butler greeted him with a mixture of surprise and dread, and the name echoed faintly up the stairs. Damon Ashford. The brother. The ghost. The other side of the coin. Cole hadn't mentioned him, not even once. Not in his moments of honesty. Not in his guarded silences. And certainly not in those vulnerable seconds when she'd seen the boy under the CEO. But there he was. Tall, effortless, with the same piercing blue eyes as Cole, only colder, hungrier. Amara stepped away from the window as footsteps echoed in the foyer below, and Cole's voice, sharp, low, stunned, cut through the stillness. "What the hell are you doing here?" Damon laughed, smooth, rich, poison in a crystal glass. "Nice to see you too, little brother." Amara hesitated at the top of the stairs, heart pounding. She peeked through the railing and saw them, two men with the same bone structure and bloodline, but utterly different in presence. Cole was rigid, guarded. Damon was silk-wrapped menace. "You're not welcome here," Cole said. Damon raised a brow. "I believe the company documents disagree." Cole stepped forward. "You forfeited your rights when you vanished." "And yet here I am," Damon replied coolly, "with lawyers who say otherwise. We need to talk. Privately." Amara backed away before she was seen, scooping the baby into her arms and whispering comfort, even though her hands trembled. She didn't like the way Damon had looked around the house, like he already owned it. She didn't like the way his eyes had flicked towards the stairs, calculated, invasive, searching. She stayed close to the nursery that day, ears perked for footsteps, for arguments, for signs of Cole's breaking point. Later, she passed Damon in the hall. He stopped, smiled. "You must be the nanny," he said, voice like silk over knives. "Amara, isn't it?" "Yes," she said, holding the baby tighter. He glanced at the child, something flickering in his eyes. Not warmth, not familial fondness, but interest, investment, possession. "She's beautiful," he said. "Looks like her mother." Amara's jaw tightened. "You knew Lila?" Damon's smile faltered for half a second. In passing. "Before or after the wedding?" she asked coolly. He grinned again, but his eyes didn't. "You're sharp. I like that." She stepped back. "I don't care what you like," he chuckled, brushing past her, and she felt the chill of his presence cling to her skin like cobwebs. That night, she found Cole alone in the cellar, boxing up old wine bottles with more force than necessary. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" she asked. "Because he's not part of my life anymore," Cole replied, "or wasn't, until now." "What does he want?" "Control," Cole said, "of the company, of the estate, of everything he thinks he was owed." "And the baby?" Amara asked softly. Cole went still. "He has no claim." "None, but that's never stopped him from trying to steal what's mine." Amara touched his arm. "Then we won't let him." He looked at her, eyes softening. "We?" She nodded. "She's not just your daughter anymore." He didn't respond, but the gratitude in his gaze said everything. Over the next few days, Damon slithered through the manor like he belonged there. He drank the finest whiskey, flirted shamelessly with the staff, and inserted himself into boardroom meetings with a smirk that made Cole clench his fists. Amara watched him carefully, noting how his charm was too polished, his questions too probing, especially when he asked about the baby's schedule, her health, her routine. One evening, she walked into the nursery and found him standing over the crib, staring down at the child with a blank expression. "She doesn't look like Cole," he said, not turning around. "She doesn't act like him either." Amara stepped forward, heart thudding. "She's sleeping. You should leave." He turned, slow and deliberate. "You know, Lila and I used to talk a lot. Before the end, she told me secrets." "She feared someone," Amara said coldly. "And I think I just found him." Damon's eyes glittered. "Careful, Nanny. Curiosity is a dangerous trait in this house." "So is ambition," she fired back, "especially when it's aimed at a child." Damon smiled and stepped past her again, his cologne lingering like smoke. Amara's mind raced. If Lila had confided in Damon, if he had motives buried beneath his slick exterior, then the fire that killed her might not have been the accident everyone had whispered about. That night, she went to the library and searched the family archives again, finding business records, old photographs, family trees. Damon had been a rising star before he disappeared. Sharp, charismatic, but reckless. Rumors hinted at embezzlement, betrayal, and a woman who had filed a restraining order that never made it to court. Her name was blurred in the files, but Amara caught a partial signature. L.M. Lila Monroe. At line 500, Amara sat in the library, eyes wide, hands shaking. If Lila had tried to expose Damon, and he'd returned now to claim what was once his, then this wasn't just a family feud. It was a battle over legacy, inheritance, and maybe vengeance. At line 550, she realized she could no longer rely on Cole's strength alone. She would have to protect the baby, guard her like a lioness, because Damon wasn't just after the company. He was after what Lila had left behind. And something in his eyes told Amara. He never let go of what he wanted. And he never, ever played fair. The mansion was unusually quiet that night, the kind of silence that carried tension, like a tightrope stretched too far. Amara paced the upstairs hall with the baby asleep in her arms, her ears tuned to every creak of the floorboards and rustle of wind against the windows. Something in her gut wouldn't settle, not since Damon's stare that afternoon, the smug tilt of his smile as if he already knew how this would all end. Cole had retreated to his study after dinner, nursing a glass of scotch, weary from a day of battling board members Damon had manipulated into questioning his leadership. Amara knew better now than to believe in coincidences. Damon was pulling strings, tight ones, and Cole was unraveling. She placed the baby gently in her crib and left the nursery door cracked before moving silently down the staircase, barefoot, heart pounding. The study's door was slightly ajar, and the fire inside flickered like a warning signal. She approached, about to knock, when she froze. Inside, Damon stood over the drink cart, pouring something from a small amber vial into Cole's scotch. Her blood ran cold. The liquid was nearly invisible, but his movements were too precise, too calm. Not hesitation. Practice. "What are you doing?" she demanded, pushing the door open. Damon jerked, the vial slipping from his fingers and shattering on the floor as Cole turned, blinking in confusion. "Amara?" He slurred slightly, already halfway through the poisoned glass. "Don't drink that!" she cried, rushing forward and knocking the glass from his hand. It shattered against the hearth, amber liquid spraying the rug like blood. "What the hell is going on?" Cole staggered back, eyes narrowing at his brother. Damon straightened. The mask gone. "You should have stayed out of it, Nanny," he hissed. "You don't know what you're doing." "No," she said fiercely, placing herself between him and Cole. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm protecting this family. From you." Cole was pale, his breath shallow, sweat beading on his brow. You tried to—" "Yes, little brother," Damon snapped. "I did, because you stole everything. You always did." Even Lila Cole's face contorted. "Lila didn't want you, Damon. She never did." "She loved me first," Damon roared. "Before you ever saw her, she was mine. And she would have stayed mine if you hadn't manipulated her, married her, got her pregnant like she was some trophy to win." Amara gasped, but Cole stepped forward, fury igniting in his eyes. "She chose me because you scared her, Damon. She begged me to keep you away. That's why I covered it up. That's why I didn't go to the police when she died. Because I knew what it would do to the Ashford name. Because I knew they'd say we were all monsters." "You let them think it was an accident," Amara cried, stunned. "You knew he did it." "I suspected," Cole said, his voice breaking. "But I had no proof, and if it came out, our daughter would have been tainted by it forever. I thought I was protecting her." Damon laughed bitterly. "She died in that fire because she was going to expose me. And now, you're both just reaping the sympathy." He reached into his coat. But not anymore. Amara moved before she thought, hurling the Aubandhalmam brass fire poker at his arm. It struck him hard, and the vial he had hidden slipped and shattered again. Not poison this time, but something darker, thicker. Drugs. Evidence. Cole lunged then, tackling Damon to the ground, years of rage boiling over into a violent struggle. They fought like wolves, brothers turned enemies, fists landing with bone-cracking force. Amara grabbed the phone and called the police, shouting for help as she tried to pull Cole back. Blood stained the edge of the hearth. Damon was losing, but he smiled through his broken lip. "You'll never escape me," he hissed. "Even if I die tonight, you'll carry my name. You'll carry our father's sins. The world will never forget what you are." Cole stared at him, breathing hard. "Number, but I can choose what I become." The sirens wailed in the distance as Amara dropped to her knees beside them, trembling. "It's over," she said, barely believing it. "He's done." Damon laughed once more, low, bitter, and passed out from the pain. When the police arrived, the story spilled out quickly. Attempted poisoning, confession, decades-old obsession, threats, even the hidden letters Amara had preserved as evidence. It was enough. More than enough. Damon was taken into custody, cuffed and cursing, and Cole sat slumped against the fireplace, shaking, not with weakness, but with the relief of finally facing the truth. Amara knelt beside him, brushing blood from his cheek. "You were trying to protect her," she said gently. "But the truth always finds a way. I didn't deserve her," he murmured. "Lila, or you." "She would have forgiven you," Amara said. "And I'm still here." In the silence that followed, only the baby's soft cry echoed through the halls. Cole stood slowly, took Amara's hand, and for the first time, didn't flinch from the weight of his family's sins. At line 500, the storm outside broke, but the sky above the manor cleared for the first time in what felt like years. At line 550, Cole lifted his daughter into his arms and kissed her forehead, whispering, "No more lies. I promise." Amara stood beside him, her heart full of sorrow and strength, knowing the worst was behind them. But the hardest part had just begun. Rebuilding trust, truth, and the love buried beneath the ashes. The lights in the hospital corridor never dimmed, casting a cold, sterile glow on the white floors that Amara had paced for what felt like hours, maybe days, her shoes forgotten in a corner, her hair tied up hastily, and her eyes raw from too little sleep and too many memories. Cole had gone under quickly after the ambulance arrived. Blood loss, concussion, exhaustion, all at once, as if his body had finally surrendered after years of holding in too much. Amara had ridden with him, clutching his hand even as the paramedics worked frantically. Her thoughts a blur of Damon's twisted grin, Cole's bloodied knuckles, and the sound of sirens wailing louder than her heart could bear. The doctors had been reassuring. No permanent damage, they'd said. Just rest, just time. But when the man you love is pale and silent in a bed of wires and tubes, time feels like cruelty. She stayed by his side, even when the nurses gently suggested she sleep, eat, rest. She couldn't. Not when the last thing Cole had done was protect her. Not when his last look had been one of regret and something deeper, something terrified and soft. She sat beside him, holding his hand, whispering to him about the baby, about the house, about how the sunlight had finally broken through the manor's grey windows that morning, and how it felt like hope. And then, late into the night, when the machines beeped in calm rhythms and the world outside slowed to a whisper, he said her name. Barely audible, like breath fading in winter. Amara! Her heart jolted. She leaned in, eyes wide. "I'm here, Cole. I'm right here." He didn't open his eyes, not yet, but his lips moved again, dry and cracked. "Don't leave me." Her fingers trembled as she brushed the hair from his brow. "Never," she whispered. "I won't." Hours passed before his eyelids finally fluttered and the blue of his gaze returned, dazed but alive, like dawn through fog. He blinked at her, at the ceiling, and then back at her. "Amara." "Hey," she smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You scared me." "Is the baby okay?" he asked hoarsely. She nodded. "She's safe. Thanks to you." He winced, shifting slightly. "And Damon?" "In custody," she said, "with enough charges to keep him far away for good." He looked away then, ashamed. "I should have stopped him sooner. I should have told the truth from the beginning." She leaned closer. "You did what you thought was right. You tried to protect your daughter, your family." "And I failed," he said bitterly. "No," she countered, her voice steady. "You survived. You fought. And you're still here. That's not failure, Cole. That's strength. He closed his eyes for a long moment, as if trying to absorb her words. Then he said, almost to himself, I don't deserve this, any of this, especially not you. Why? She asked softly. Because your brother was a monster? Because your father left scars you didn't choose? You're not them, Cole. But I carry them inside me, he whispered. The same blood, the same name. Every time I look in the mirror, I see what I could become. What I almost did. And yet you didn't, she said. You chose differently. You stepped in front of your daughter. You took the hit. You didn't walk away. His hand found hers again, weak but sincere. I keep trying to be better. But when I look at you, Amara, it hurts. Why? She asked, voice barely a breath. He turned his gaze to her again, and for once there was nothing held back. No armor, no walls, just a man in pain, in awe, in love. Because you make me want things I thought I wasn't allowed to want anymore. Because you make me believe in a version of me that might be worth saving. And because when I was unconscious, all I could think of was you. Her heart clenched. Cole, I'm falling in love with you, he said, raw and honest. But I don't know how to love someone without ruining them. She touched his cheek, leaned in close, forehead resting against his. Then let me teach you. We'll learn together. He blinked fast, eyes glassy. You'd stay? Even now? Yes, she said without hesitation. Because I see you, the real you, and I'm not afraid. His breath hitched, and he turned his face into her palm, pressing a kiss to it with such reverence it broke her open inside. The door creaked as a nurse peeked in, smiling softly before slipping out again, giving them space. They sat in silence for a long while, her head resting on the edge of the bed, their hands intertwined, his pulse steadying with every second. At line 500, Cole whispered, I don't know how this ends. Amara smiled. Neither do I, but I know it doesn't have to end here. At line 550, the sun rose over the city, casting golden light across Cole's face as Amara whispered stories of second chances and new beginnings, and somewhere between pain and promise, they began to believe them. The microphone felt heavier than it looked, like it carried not just sound, but every story that had been buried under fear, silence, and the weight of power gone unchecked. Amara stood at the edge of the press conference stage, the lights hot, the air buzzing with reporters, cameras, flashing bulbs, and an ocean of expectant faces. She could see Cole sitting near the front, still recovering, his arm in a sling, his expression unreadable. Except for his eyes. His eyes were on her, like she was his anchor. She took a breath, her hand wrapped around the folded letter in her pocket, like a lifeline, and stepped up to the podium. Her heart beat wildly in her chest, not out of fear, but purpose. She didn't flinch when the cameras turned, when the murmurs rippled through the crowd like a tide swelling before a storm. Good morning, she began, her voice firm, unwavering. My name is Amara Jackson. I'm the nanny to Cole Ashford's daughter. But I stand here today not just in that role. I stand as a witness, as a woman, as someone who's seen the damage that silence can do, and as someone who refuses to let it win. A hush fell across the room. Several weeks ago, Cole Ashford's brother, Damon Ashford, attempted to murder him. This was not an isolated act of violence. It was the culmination of years of obsession, manipulation, and darkness hidden behind wealth, privilege, and a powerful last name. And the person caught in the middle of that storm was Lila Ashford. She reached into her pocket, unfolding the letter with reverent hands. Before she died in a fire that many believed to be accidental, Lila wrote a letter meant for her daughter. She never got the chance to deliver it. Today, I'm reading it with her voice. The air thickened as she began, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. To my sweet girl, if you're reading this, then something has happened. I hope I'm wrong. I hope you never need to see this. But if you are, know that you are loved more deeply than any words can hold. I was afraid. Not of your father. He's a good man who carries pain he doesn't talk about. But of someone else. Someone close. Someone who doesn't know how to love without hurting. Amara paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. You may grow up in a world that tries to erase women who look like me, who look like you. Don't let them. Speak, even if your voice shakes. Love, even if they tell you you're not worthy. Live, as boldly as you can. That's my wish for you. By the time she folded the letter again, the room was silent except for the click of a few stunned cameras. Lila wasn't just a wife or a mother. She was a black woman who saw the truth, who feared it would be ignored, and who wrote her truth anyway. And for too long, stories like hers are lost, dismissed, buried. Not today. She looked out over the crowd, meeting the eyes of the board members, the executives, the journalists who had once printed headlines accusing Cole of neglect, of scandal, of suspicion. Today, I'm here to clear Cole Ashford's name. He didn't harm his wife. He protected her daughter. He faced his own demons and still stood between his family and the man who destroyed everything. But this isn't just about Cole. This is about accountability. About how silence can become a weapon. About how powerful men, like Damon Ashford, use shadows to move freely. No more. Reporters shot up, hands raised, questions bubbling. But Amara held up her hand. This is not a debate. This is not a rumor. This is fact. I was there. I saw it. I have evidence. And more importantly, I have a voice. One I won't quiet, just to keep the peace. She stepped away from the podium briefly, unfolding another paper. Police records, statements, a copy of Lila's autopsy, revised after recent findings, confirmed she'd been drugged before the fire, tying everything back to Damon. This is what justice looks like, not because it's clean, but because it's true. In the corner, she saw Cole lower his head into his hand, emotion breaking through. Amara's eyes glistened, but she didn't break. She didn't waver. This isn't just about one family. This is about every black woman who was silenced by wealth. Every woman of color whose fear was dismissed. Every child who grew up without answers. This is for them. At line 400, the applause didn't erupt immediately. It built. Like thunder gathering, one clap, then another, then a rolling storm of hands crashing together in a way that wasn't about politeness. It was about truth being heard. Amara stepped back, exhaling, heart pounding, the letter still clutched in her fingers, like a flag raised in a quiet war. She walked off the stage and straight to Cole, who stood now, despite the ache in his ribs, pulling her into a tight, fierce hug that said everything his words couldn't. You didn't have to do that, he whispered. I did, she replied. For her. For us. At line 500, news outlets were already spreading headlines. Nanny exposes family secrets. Damon Ashford arrested in murder plot. Lila Ashford's voice lives on. And underneath them all, new names rose. Names like Amara Jackson. Names of truth-tellers. Names of women who dared. That night, as Cole, Amara, and the baby sat together in the manor's once haunted library, now bright with sun and peace, he touched her hand and said, "You saved me. Again." She smiled softly. We saved each other. At line 570, he kissed her. No longer stolen, no longer silent, but chosen. And when the baby giggled in her lap, reaching for both their hands, it was as if Lila's words echoed in the room, proud, free, and unforgotten. At line 600, Amara knew they were no longer living in the shadows. They were rising, together, from the ashes. The morning sun spilled golden light across the Ashford estate, not in the sombre slant it once did, but in a wide, open wash of warmth, as if even the house had finally exhaled, finally accepted joy back into its bones. The walls that once held secrets now held frames of laughter, of tiny handprints and crayon masterpieces, and in the heart of it all stood the nursery, once a chamber of whispers, now a sanctuary of giggles and coos, where Cole Ashford sat cross-legged on the floor, his once pristine designer shirt now peppered with mashed banana and pink marker scribbles, his blue eyes softened by love and fatherhood, while Amara, radiant in a sundress dotted with daisies, twirled their daughter gently in her arms to a rhythm only they understood. It had been a year since that press conference, a year since the flames of truth burned away the lies, and in that year the world had shifted. Not just in headlines, but in hearts, especially theirs. The company, once a cold empire of profit, had transformed into a social impact foundation under Cole's leadership, championing single mothers, racial justice, early education, and most recently, a scholarship fund in Lila's name. A name now spoken not with sorrow, but with honor, whose portrait now hung in the entryway in full, unburned glory, framed by light, watching over them all like a proud guardian. Amara had returned to her writing, her essays now gracing magazines and talk shows, her voice a torch for women once silenced, and everywhere she went, someone would stop her, thank her, tell her she gave them courage. But the public legacy was nothing compared to the private one. The quiet Saturdays spent gardening in the back, the slow dances in the kitchen after the baby was asleep, the shared glances that still crackled with fire, and the way Cole would wake first every morning just to watch his wife and daughter breathing softly, as if anchoring himself in the beauty of what they built. On the day of their anniversary, the house was alive, with family and music, with old staff and new friends, with balloons tangled in chandeliers and laughter echoing down once haunted halls. And yet, the most sacred moment came late after the crowd had gone, and twilight kissed the windows. Amara stood by the nursery door, listening as Cole read a bedtime story, his voice soft, theatrical, full of joy, while their daughter squealed with delight. Amara walked in just as he reached the last line, and their daughter, Assistant Cole, looked up, tears shimmering, and whispered, "That's everything, isn't it?" And Amara nodded, stepping into his arms. The three of them curled together on the rocking chair, wrapped in a blanket of peace that had been hard-won, paid for in pain and truth and bravery. Outside, the wind rustled gently through the trees, not like a warning, but like a lullaby. And somewhere in that breeze was the memory of Lila's voice, whispering not in fear, but in thanks. At line 500, Cole kissed Amara's forehead and said, "You gave me this life." And Amara, resting her head against his chest, replied, "No, we created it. Out of ashes, out of love." Their daughter stirred in her sleep and mumbled a word neither of them had taught her. Home. And they smiled at each other, knowing that home wasn't walls or wealth or names, but the space between hearts that chose to stay. By line 580, the stars blinked above, the fireplace hummed low, and Amara's journal lay open on her nightstand, a final sentence written across the page. Whispers turn to laughter when truth is louder than fear. And as midnight came quietly, carrying a new day in its hands, the Ashford family slept soundly, whole, unbroken, loved.